Hello, welcome everyone to our next session on AML in capital markets. First of all, I would just like to introduce all of us. Richard, first we have Richard Carrick, who is CEO at Crime Research Agency, an NGO focused on transnational and organized crime. Richard was previously the head of Crime Stoppers Asia, and before that, the former regional head of financial crime assurance at Barclays Bank in Singapore. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jelinek. I'm research director at Kapronasia. We're a research consultancy based in Singapore. We focus on financial technology, banking, capital markets, and payments. Right. We are due to have another panelist join us, Ludovic Dufetel. So perhaps before he joins, I will probably just like to introduce the theme today. So if we go to our first slide. Thank you. Great. Okay, so I'd like to set the scene. So our listeners will note the caption on this slide accompanying a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Wolf of Wall Street. It reads, "We should not worry. AML risk is a commercial banking problem. There is no risk in capital markets." Well, this could not be further from the truth. Traditionally, banks have been thinking that risk on capital markets is limited, and the result has been that technology, the expertise and tools developed to cover AML in capital markets is still in its infancy. At the same time, we have seen use cases. We've seen Deutsche Bank case. We've seen issues with ING, with Danske Bank, issues with penny stocks in the US. So what can we conclude from all of this? There is a lot of progress to be done on the frameworks, and this needs to be done for all the industry. At the same time, it would appear that banks have not fully taken on board the lessons of recent cases. So Richard, I'd like to come to you first. AML risk in capital markets has gained the public's attention in recent years. Is AML risk in capital markets something new? If we could have slide two.
It's not new. It's just, I think, newly realized, I think, by regulators. Because if you look at the nature of capital markets anyway, the fact that you have direct market things like direct market access, where you don't even have to go through a person. If you have millions of transactions moving at nanoseconds in a day. And very high value ones as well. So it makes it absolutely perfect if you're a money launderer who wants to move a large amount of money. And I think they've been doing it for a long time. I believe it was just probably the Russian mirror trading scheme that Deutsche Bank got caught out on, just sort of started to I guess, get the regulators looking even further into that kind of a scenario, and what is the scope of the issue across the market. And then I know the FCA did a targeted review, which we'll go into a little bit later, but what they found was there was very little awareness across the banks that this was even a risk, and quite a lot still needs to be done there.
Yeah. And then could you just talk a little bit about this slide that we've got up now? Would you just be able to provide some comment there about what we're looking at here?
Yeah. So if you look at so I think Deutsche Bank was the first one to really show AML through money, I guess, through capital markets on a very large scale, and you see they got hit with a £163 million fine. And then from that, I think regulators started looking a little bit closer into that. And then that's where you start seeing, after this point, the likes of ING getting hit with 775 million euros, Danske Bank, that's also pulling in Swedbank, Deutsche Bank, and a number of other banks, and that amount is going to just keep spiraling because it was absolutely huge, particularly showing the huge amount of money that's actually being moved by various Russian parties into capital markets outside of Russia. And now we see things like third-party deposits and a number of folks getting caught out in that, and it's just kind of carrying on. So I think this is very much a top topic for regulators now.
Yes. If we could go to the next slide, please. Richard, so from what you say, what has been the regulatory response to AML risk in capital markets? Can you provide us with an example?
An example of a regulator, I guess the response from regulators. Yes. I know I guess the first regulator I've seen respond to this, but I'm sure other regulators may have been doing it as well, was the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. They did a thematic review after the Deutsche Bank mirror trading scandal, and I guess from their point of view, they realized that there was a lot of other firms that have said, well, is there any guidance on this? So what is it that you expect us to be able to do in relation to AML and capital markets? And then on the back of that, they actually then decided that they were going to do a thematic review on numerous banks, brokers, and many other types of financial services firms. And within that actual thematic review, one thing that they found was capital markets is actually a lot more attractive to money launderers than a lot of banks had actually realized. And from what I mentioned before, it's because these are complex, high-value products that are moved executed very, very quickly. But the surprising thing to the FCA is, and in a way I kind of feel sorry for Deutsche Bank, because it was sort of found that, well, they didn't have any controls. They got the fine for it, but most other banks didn't really have too much in the way of controls or policies or procedures around capital markets, and that was, I guess, the main issue. So they started to notice things like some of the participants just weren't clear on the obligations, even to submit suspicious activity reports. Actually, the National Crime Agency, which is the financial crime unit for the UK, Financial Crime Intelligence Unit for the UK, they had about 463,938 SARs submitted between 2017 and 2018. And they realized that only out of all of that, only 324 of them actually related to capital markets, sort of brings home that particular point. And they also gave some, I guess, some guidance on, some of the most effective ways to counter these money laundering risks in capital markets. And they realized that it's because there are so many banks in a chain that it's up to every bank in the chain to have a really solid customer due diligence, KYC type processes in place to understand if any of the other capital markets firms in their network are doing something suspicious. And then the other thing is going to be around having better trade surveillance and combining that with transaction monitoring. So being able to understand what these patterns look like as they appear in the bank, being able to flag those up. And another thing they had mentioned as well is around the traders. It really has to be, the traders are in the best position, the front office people are in the best position to detect AML, and training for them is sort of essential.
And if we could go to the next slide, please. Richard, just sticking with you. Look, what is AML risk exactly in capital markets? What are we looking for here?
Yeah, I think the AML risk is that there's several complex ways, like such as that the mirror trading schemes, use of derivatives. We're looking at free of payment, movement of securities. There's just so many different ways using complex products that you can move things without really being known. Particularly if you take a look at the power you would have if you had a brokerage, for instance. I know you watch TV and you see all of these, that the whole panacea for money launderers is to own a casino. In my mind, I would rather own a brokerage. You can have a brokerage in British Virgin Islands, and nobody really knows from the banks that you deal with, as long as you've been onboarded. Nobody knows who your customer is. And so you can just take on every dodgy group you can think of who pays you a ton of money. And then you can just start executing, share transactions, financial product transactions on their behalf. So maybe I can just go through this particular case study that sort of kind of shows how that works and how easy it is. If we take a look at what I call it free of payment movement of securities. So how does that work?
Yes, I'm sorry, Richard, before we go on to that, listen, we've had, so Ludovic has now joined. So Ludovic Dufetel, thank you very much for joining us. Ludovic is in charge of global market AML framework for BNP Paribas APAC. Ludovic started his career in Paris, then moved to Asia 7 years ago. He has over 12 years of experience on compliance projects for investment banks. Welcome, Ludovic. Ludovic, I just want to, before we go on to the case studies, Ludovic, why are capital markets risky from an AML perspective?
So first of all, can you hear me well? Is the communication good? All right.
Yes.
Sorry for being late. I had a few technical issues. So I would say there are four main reasons, in my view, why capital markets are very risky from an AML perspective. The first reason is that you have an extreme complexity of settlement networks, right? If you are settling a cash equity transaction, for instance, you're going to be dealing with a local custodian, a global custodian, a broker, an exchange. If you're an investment bank in the APAC region, for instance, you are going to deal with at least 10 or 15 different cash equity markets. Every cash equity market is going to have a different data structure for, structuring settlement data. So as a result, the flow of data that you have to monitor and that you have to understand is extremely complex and is often partial because you are only one small part of the big picture. So as a result, it takes a huge amount of resources for banks to properly, monitor their settlement flows. And this is one of the key challenges that banks face today. The second point I would like to mention, and which is more or less related to the first one, is that you have a very high number of intermediaries that are involved on most deals. If you take a structured product, for instance, you're going to have an investment bank that's going to create the product itself. Then you're going to have a private bank who is going to be distributing the product. You're going to have usually several custodians who are going to be involved of settling and of putting the product in custody. So as a result, you have many people who only have a small part of the equation and who most of the time put the responsibility of monitoring and of controlling the risk on the other. So when you talk to the investment bank is going to say, I don't know who is the UBO. It's the responsibility of the private bank to know who the beneficial owner is. And it's also going to tell you, well, you know what? The custodian is doing the settlement. He's supposed to know where the money is going. I'm not. So it's really, an issue where, we need to really refocus on who is responsible for what. On top of that, I think we have, a very competitive, commission-driven environment. You have traders, sales who are making very big bonuses at the end of the year, very significant variable, income, and as a result, they may be tempted to collude with money launderers. Last but not least, and this is to me maybe the biggest problem. We have a lack of maturity on AML programs. It was part of my introduction that I wasn't able to do, but AML risk on capital markets is something which is quite new. Until now, banks have spent most of their resources on controlling risk for mostly for cash management transactions, commercial banking. And as a result, the level of maturity of AML frameworks for capital markets is not there yet. The vendors, the regulators, the banks, they have not developed and totally refined their level of expertise. And as a result, it's a big challenge that we face together. So
Yeah, that's brilliant, Ludovic. And look, I want to move on to the case studies now to look at all of this in practice. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Ludovic, I believe you have a case study concerning the mirror trade use case to provide listeners with an example of money laundering in capital markets.
Yes, so this is a very famous use case, and a very famous international bank was involved. Here, we're just going to call it mirror trading. It's probably the most famous, but not the only one, but the most famous mirror trading case that we are aware of. Essentially, you have two clients, client one and client two. And the objective here of the game for them is to transfer value from Russia to the UK without needing any wire transfer. Okay, so and how do they do that? Well, it's actually very simple. Richard was talking about being a broker and how easy it was when you're a broker to help on the money laundering side. Well, you're going to have client one in Russia who is going to talk to a broker, and this broker will help him access the cash equity desk of a large investment bank in Russia. These large investment banks will, on behalf of the broker, purchase a large volume of securities denominated in local currency, so in rubles. All right, these securities will be, delivered to a local custodian account in Russia. And now, on step 5, that you can see on this graph, this is where the magic happens. You're going to have a free of payment, i.e. a transfer of securities between two custodian networks. So the client one is going to transfer the securities to the custodian network of client two. And the trick here is that the cash account of the second custodian network is located in the UK. And remember that for the rest of the case. The next step, client two is going to sell his securities, again, using the local UK desk of the investment bank. And the proceeds of the sale in USD or in British pounds will be delivered to a cash account located in the UK, only because the custodian network is different. So as a result, between client one and client two, we were able to transfer value from Russia to the UK without the need of a wire transfer. And usually that's the whole point of using capital markets. It's avoiding, obvious wire transfers between high risk and low risk jurisdictions.
Yes. And Ludovic and Richard, so maybe Ludovic, we can start with you. What detection scenarios could be put in place concerning this mirror trade use case?
So I can name two, and so the first one, if you can see the UK investment bank, the UK cash equity desk. All right, this UK cash equity desk is constantly selling securities denominated in a high-risk currency and delivering it to a custodian account, which is located in the UK. As a result, there is a constant transfer of value from Russia to the UK. The second way is to say, all right, if I have a client who buys securities, then sells securities, and in between will change his settlement instructions, it probably means that there is a change of custodian in between the two deals, and as a result, it's probably a mirror trade.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And Richard, over to you. What would be your take in terms of detection scenarios?
I think one of the ways to do that, one of the characteristics of mirror trading is that it usually involves a buy and a sell on two particular markets in the same security at the same time. So if let's say if Vodafone happened to be on the Russian exchange and it's on the UK exchange, I would buy, if I was in Russia, I would be buying the Russian security in Vodafone, and then I would be also simultaneously selling that, and while we're buying doing the same trade on the UK stock exchange. And so what I would be looking for is a simultaneous buy and sell of the same security in two different markets within a very narrow time frame. And in order to do that, you would have to probably, as a bank, you would probably have to have a global trade surveillance capability that would allow you to see what's happening in multiple markets at the same time, which is probably take a number of banks a while to get there. But that, for instance, should throw up a red flag, and then that's something that could be investigated immediately.
And Richard, look, I'd like to stick with you. Now, I believe you also have a case study concerning, as you mentioned earlier, the free of payments use case, to provide listeners with an example of AML, of money laundering in capital markets.
Yeah. So this is kind of a component of the Russian mirror trading that Ludovic's just gone through. But outside of Russian mirror trading, this is something that is very commonly done and very easy to do. So mirror trading takes a lot of coordination, takes some inside help from within a bank, but this one might need some inside help from your brokerage in a less high risk offshore location, but it's easy to do. So all you're basically doing is having your broker, who's been onboarded by multiple other banks, correspondent banks in major financial centers. You're basically placing trades through there just to buy some shares. And so the other banks who are executing these shares in the major markets, they don't know who the broker's customer is. They really can't know that. So if I want to launder money and I have my own, I've paid off a brokerage in some offshore location, then he goes off to the market and just buys me a bunch of shares. And those shares are now listed in my share account with my broker. Now, all I have to do is now set up another brokerage account in somewhere like London, New York, or Singapore, or somewhere like that. And then I just simply tell my broker, I want you to just transfer my shares from my brokerage account in this offshore location. I just want you to kind of transfer those to my new account in London, Singapore, or somewhere like a larger, more trusted market. And so, therefore, he does a free of payment transfer, and I think it's like a Swift 540 or something like that. So they'll do a free of payment transfer, and those shares then go to my account. Now that they're in my account in the UK, for instance, then I'll simply just sell them. I'll sell the shares, no problem. And then if somebody asks, and I'll get money back for selling my shares. And then if anybody asks me, well, where did you get the money from? Oh, I sold some shares. Here's my deal ticket. Then then you've integrated it. You've now laundered your money. So super simple to do, and it's kind of tricky to detect as well.
Yes, and in fact, talking of detection, both this is for you, both of you, Richard and Ludovic, and Richard, we'll start with you. What detection scenarios could be put in place concerning this free of payments use case?
One could be you happen to notice there's a lot of transfers being done by a client in an offshore location with high value on a very frequent basis. That can give it away. Because if you're laundering $1 billion, for instance, you've got to break that down. And so you're just going to keep doing this over and over and over again. So it looks like it's within your means. Other things you can be doing is you should be able to do a little bit more due diligence on the brokerages where you see this kind of a pattern happening. And it would be good to almost ask for like an independent third-party audit report on that too, to just verify that their AML policies, processes, and controls are looking good, and that it's not just window dressing. Usually, if you're an offshore broker just laundering money, you might just cut and paste somebody else's policies and documents and just have it sitting there, but you're never going to use it. So that's kind of another way to do it. But those are sort of kind of the initial one, the main ones.
Yes, and Richard, what about you? Ludovic, what about you? What's your take on this in terms of detection?
On this, usually, I would say that my focus would be to really understand, your level of risk depending on the types of securities that can be transferred. For instance, take a dual listed security. All right, a security that's like, take HSBC for instance. HSBC is listed in Hong Kong. HSBC is listed in the UK. So it's very, it's easier to transfer from a location to another. Any dual listed securities is a risk because it is very easy to transfer value. Another type of security that I find very interesting, it's the global depositary receipts or American depositary receipts. For those who don't know exactly what these are, they are basically cross-border securities that can be listed in a country and then converted to another security which will be listed in another country. So all these depositary receipts can easily be used to transfer value from a country to another.
Yes. Okay. Yes, sorry, Ludovic, did you want to say something else on that?
No, that's my...
Okay. Well, look, as we sort of move into the final leg of what's been a very insightful overview of AML in capital markets. So, I'd like to look at the future challenges for banks. What are the challenges that banks must face to tackle money laundering in capital markets? What can banks do to manage the risk? So I'd like to make this sort of final stretch of the session an open discussion. So, whoever wants to sort of kick that off.
Well, I think, my feeling is, and then I will let Richard comment on that, but I feel that most key players on this in this ecosystem, vendors, banks, regulators, are still really in the infancy of understanding the risk. I think the risk is extremely complex because it will depend on the product. It will depend on the settlement footprint of each organization. It will depend on the country, on the market. I think that the level of understanding of money laundering patterns for each product and each type of settlement footprint is still in its infancy. So in the future, we have lots of resources to spend, I think, everywhere on better understanding the risk and defining, I would say, more specific and more acute, refined detection models that will generate less noise. I will let Richard add upon that, but...
Yeah, I think the big challenge, we've mentioned a lot about the challenges with the bank, but I think as far as what can they do in response to that, I think the FCA and other regulators have sort of given a bit of a hint too. One is the regulators are starting to provide typologies, which are common methods of money laundering through capital markets, and they're going to expect you to be in a position to explain to them how your policies, processes, and controls, your whole AML framework is able to mitigate the risk related to that. And then I guess a lot of banks would be left sitting there thinking, okay, well, that's good, but what really specifically should we be doing? I think some of the hints in there is one, training the front office staff, because they're in the best position to actually notice that, certifying them and training them in money laundering, like not just what the regulatory requirement is, but how do you actually launder money through capital markets? And so that's kind of one way. The other way is going to be putting a lot more scrutiny and maybe doing enhanced due diligence on all brokers and considering them a lot higher risk than they appear to be at the moment. And then the third thing is really going to be around having more efficient monitoring tools. And I touched on this before. If you were to have your trade surveillance and your transaction monitoring, right now, if you look at trade surveillance, most banks use trade surveillance to look at market abuse, things like insider trading. Trade surveillance is very rarely used for AML purposes, but it could be, and it should be, and the FCA and other regulators say you have to. So if you combine that, for instance, with transaction monitoring, because each trade has a corresponding financial transaction, unless it's free of payments, of course. And you can see patterns in there that kind of would alert you to a lot of these things. And I touched on that with the free of payment transfers. You see, somebody who's in a risky jurisdiction constantly sending lots of, the SWIFT 540 transfer free of payment messages on a regular basis. Your transaction monitoring should pick that up. Mirror trading, if you start seeing characteristics like simultaneous buys and sells of the same security, the same amount in two different markets, it could pick that up and allow you to investigate it. And there's lots and lots of different, for each of these typologies that the regulator gives you, there are ways to detect, there are characteristics of a lot of these that you can look for in your transaction monitoring and your trade surveillance, and they shouldn't be two separate things. You should be looking at them, both of them simultaneously.
Yeah, sorry, Ludovic, did you have something?
Yeah, there's also something I wanted to add, is that I often hear, that the key solution, or what we are looking, that AI is going to save us, artificial intelligence, and that it is the end of rule-based monitoring systems. What I really think is that if you have a bad rule-based system, and if you don't understand your data, and if you don't understand your risk, you're never going to have good results, and you're always going to generate a lot of noise. And even if you switch to artificial intelligence, if you don't understand your risk, you're not going to go anywhere. So I think the work is really in understanding the data and understanding the patterns, rather than switching to a new technology. I think that even if we stayed on the same technology, rule-based systems, but if we worked on the data and the risk, we would achieve a lot better results. I also think that collaboration with exchanges is very important. With Richard, we talked a lot about mirror trading. It's very clear that if you're an exchange, usually you see a lot of you see what's happening often a lot better than just the broker, if you're a broker or if you're a bank, because you see often the whole side of the story. You see the two legs of the trade. And if you are able to monitor your. I mean, if an exchange is able to use its data correctly, it's going to be able to see mirror trades, but also, price deviations. A strong price deviation can be a means for transferring value from a country to another, and obviously, if you see the two parties that are dealing on each side of the trade and that are generating a price deviation to transfer value, well, you know who to talk to. If you're a bank and if you're just one side of the deal, well, the only thing that you see is that there's a price deviation, but you don't know which parties are involved. So it's I think we need to put the exchanges on the table talking to the banks a little bit more as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because right now I think the onus is almost 100% on the banks to detect this stuff when they can only see one leg of the trade or a very small part of the trade, and so each individual part may look innocent, but when you see that in a broader context across many banks, then you see that then that is a money laundering problem. So that kind of brings up that whole topic that's been around for quite a long time. People talking about public-private partnerships, where you have all these parties at the table who are in a position to see the whole picture, such as law enforcement, the exchanges, regulators, and the banks, all being in a position at some point to work together to be able to see the bigger picture and then be able to make some real inroads. But I don't think we're not there yet.
And look, we've had a couple of questions come in from the audience, so I'd just like to pose those. I'll put them together and then up to you who wants to answer them. So first question is, are market participants paying enough attention to AML risk in capital markets? And the second question is, what should regulators be doing to promote awareness?
Right.
I think what the FCA did is great. Proposing patterns is very important, and our banks. I mean,
Hey, Ludovic. Hi, Ludovic. You're cutting out there.
I can.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to jump in?
I can cover that. So I think what's kind of happening with the banks probably aren't doing enough, because I don't think there's enough of the awareness there at the moment. I think the FCA made a good stab at kind of showing that, but I think one thing they found is a lot of the banks see that particular risk as I think most of their clients anyway are listed firms under regulatory regimes, favorable regulatory regimes, so it may not be a problem. I don't think the number of suspicious activity reports are kind of coming in that, but at the same point in time, well, the FCA have provided maybe 6 typologies and given a bit of guidance on that. I think this is fairly new to the banks, and I think there needs to be probably a lot more guidance. Perhaps FATF would be providing a lot more in-depth guidance at some point if they haven't done already. But that's kind of what's needed, and also a clear idea of, well, how do we detect this stuff and what are we supposed to do? I think that is really something that needs to get out into the market.
To add on what the FCA I think FCA showed the right thing, but they did they were like pioneers, and now the same job needs to be done 10-fold, 100-fold. We need to see more patterns, more reports like this, because they have showed basically to how it can really happen in real life, but it needs a lot more precision. It needs a lot more detail. But yes, it's the right approach.
And look, we've got one more question from the audience. Which Asia regulator has published guidelines on monitoring for AML risk in trading?
Well, they have all of them have. All of them have guidance. However, I would say that it's very generic. The FCA was the first regulator to say, all right, AML risk is real, and this is what it looks like. And I feel, and maybe Richard, you're going to correct me. because maybe you know better. You have read more on these topics. But what I've seen is that everything stays very generic. It says, be careful with your AML. You should be aware of it, and you should do due diligence on your clients. But like nobody tells you, well, this could happen. You know.
I haven't seen a lot of it. There has been some guidance that have come out. I know Maz has actually provided some AML CFT, but I think on one of the pages they've got guidance to capital markets. So I think they're starting to provide some good guidance or some good direction on that. So, but I still think it's in its infancy. A lot of the other regulators are going to need to start implementing a lot more, I guess, specific policies if that is even possible. But, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And look, we're sort of moving into the last few minutes. Would either of you, have any other comments to add around sort of future challenges, what banks need to do, how they can manage this risk?
I think there's one thing that I noticed. I mean, Richard was talking about the being able to align the market abuse framework with the AML framework. We obviously need to use market abuse signals to improve our understanding of AML risk, but I think there is a need within the banks to bring these teams together, to bring the databases together, and it will be a huge amount of work before we are able really to have these teams talk to each other and share their data. We need to create, big data warehouse that mix all the settlement data and the trading data. Usually, market abuse, it's mostly trading data, and AML, it's mostly about settlement data. We need to mix them together in the same databases, and it needs really a change in culture, because for now I see often that in banks there is a big wall between the market abuse / front office world and the compliance / AML world. So.
I think the main thing for me is it's going to be around training of front office staff to be able to detect that, even training of compliance staff. I think the approach for a lot of banks within compliance has always been to teach the regulations and teach if you're meeting the regulations, but I haven't come across a whole lot of people learning how to launder money in a bank. And I think if you don't know how the money launderers operate, then how can you create effective policies, procedures, and controls to mitigate the risk of what they're trying to move through your bank? So I think there's got to be a lot more training in how to launder money. So that's one thing. And the other thing is going to be around data analytics. At the end of the day, it's not incredibly difficult to put together half-decent data analytic systems that can ingest data from multiple sources and be able to then find patterns within that data. So I think that's got to be done. I think AI is probably going to be a bit of a pipe dream, because in order to train your systems to understand this, you have to have thousands of samples of it. And because nobody's really detected a lot of this, you don't have too many samples to actually train a machine on. So that's going to be a tricky one.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. And look, it looks like we're out of time. I'd like to thank our speakers, Ludovic Dufetel at BNP Paribas and Richard Carrick, CEO of Crime Research Agency. I want to encourage our attendees to reach out to Ludovic or Richard to find out more about AML risk in capital markets. Next up, we have a panel on conduct and culture as drivers of financial crime. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.